I'm going to give a brief introduction about what we're going to be talking about and why we're here. Before I do that, so the topic here is DASH-264 towards over-the-top interoperability. Before I do that, I'll say it's an effort by the DASH Industry Forum. Before I do that, I want to quickly introduce the panelists. I'm Mike Luby from Qualcomm Technologies. Go ahead, Will.
I'm Will Law, Principal Architect for Media at Akamai.
I'm Michael Stadtmann, Managing Director of Cars Labs.
And Andrew Popov, I'm from ByDRAM and CTO.
My name is Jan Nordman with Fraunhofer. We make audio codecs.
Okay, great, thanks. We'll get back to these guys in a minute, but let me give you a brief introduction. I don't think you really need to see this picture, but this is sort of a motivation for why, in particular, a lot of these companies are involved in that. Video is just taking off over the fixed internet, but even more over the mobile internet. And there's a lot of interest in having a standard for delivering that. I'm not going to really talk about this, about HTTP adaptive streaming. I assume if you're here, you already understand it. This kind of gives a cartoon of the technology and the different components. The only thing I'll say about this slide is that there are a lot of different parts to it. There's the client side, there's the encoding side, there's the ingestion side, there's the delivery side. And this is really a good motivation why to actually deliver something from many different content providers to many different clients, you need standards and interoperability, which is really why we're here. The MPEG standard, as people know, there's a lot of input from various groups. It's been ratified about almost a year ago at this point, and the DASH Industry Forum is kind of what grew out of that. A little bit about the DASH Industry Forum. It grew out of the DASH Promoters Group, and one of the most the key objectives there is the work of the DASH Interoperability Group, which is the part that is actually focusing on the technical work that's being done within the DASH Industry Forum, focusing on interoperability throughout the industry. So the objectives are to promote and catalyze market adoption of MPEG-DASH in general, and in particular to publish interoperability deployment guidelines and so on. The DASH Interoperability Working Group is really, it's actually kind of hard to read this off my own slides. Developing and because I wish it was here. It was developing and publish interoperability and testing procedures, support conformance and reference software development, coordinate on technical matters with other standards organizations, generation of technical requirements based on deployment experience to profile and improve MPEG-DASH, and to generate technical white papers and deployment guidelines, and a common repository for DASH-related code points. So all these are kind of important ingredients of the DASH Interoperability Working Group, which is a sub-working group of the DASH IF overall. So I think this was touched on a little bit this morning. There's the interoperability points. There's the MPEG-DASH part, as Raj and others were talking about this morning. The DASH spec itself is a huge body of work. And what we're really trying to do here is to say, let's focus down on the parts that we really want to start deploying and interoperate with. And so there's specific features that are chosen out of the MPEG-DASH itself. But in some sense, the interoperability goes beyond just what's in DASH. It goes to which codecs, including the levels and profiles that we're going to interoperate on, what subtitling and closed captioning we're going to use, which DRM baseline technologies, and other transport protocol specific aspects, including metadata. So within the DASH interoperability group, this is kind of the things that have really been concentrated on in terms of interoperability guidelines. And the basic one is the DASH-264 base. And you see certain dates up there for completion of certain stages. And I think at this point, we're pretty much on target with those dates. You also see listed a bunch of extensions, and we're really not focusing on those completely at this point. We're really trying to get the base done before we really completely focus on these extensions. But the extensions are also going to be important, and the focus on such things as HEVC video, which we know there's a lot of interest in within the industry, and other extensions, for example, higher quality video and audio. So the DASH-264 base IOP overview is that it's based on the ISO-based media file format. Those are what the segmentation is based on. For video, it's H.264 up to main profile level 3. For audio, it's HEAAC v2. For subtitling, it's SMPTE time text. So all these things, the video, audio, and subtitle bullet points are beyond what's actually specified in the Dash spec, and they kind of go beyond it. And these are really being nailed down because we want to be able to have interoperability between these different vendors. DRM baseline, ISO IEC 23001, common encryption. Doesn't say what kind of DRM to use, it just says what kind of encryption, and then various DRM solutions should be able to work with this. And then in terms of Dash itself, it's a restricted version, combination of the ISO-based media file format, live and on-demand profiles. And I'm not going to go into the details, that's not really the main point here. The main point is to let people know about this work and also just talk about it in the panel discussion. In the Dash Interoperability Working Group, there's been a lot of test cases, and when we develop a test case, it only gets onto the list if some company volunteers to provide test vectors so these things can actually be tested. And I'm not going to go through this litany list of all these different test cases, but I think there's over 20 at this point, and there are company contributions that are supporting all these so that the interoperability testing can actually be done. Test vectors and conformance. There's crucial work that for each test case, there's one or more of these test vectors that are being provided. And then the conformance software targets to verify that it passes, that it meets the criteria for what is supposed to be tested there. Conformance includes testing that the MPD is conformant, the segment formats are conformant, the restrictions are being enforced that come from the DASH-264. The media style streams themselves are conformant, and the common encryption, the DRM, is conformant. Okay, finally, I think this is pretty part of the discussion at this point, but I think everybody understands why Dash is important. Why Dash-264 is important is because otherwise there won't be, there'll be a lot of talk about Dash and people implementing Dash this way or this way or this way, but there won't be conformance across the industry. So what we really would like is that if you have a client, anybody that's encoding with the Dash-264 spec, this client will be able to play it out, and vice versa. If someone is producing encoding according to the Dash-264, then any client out there that supports Dash-264 is able to play that out. Okay. And then with that, I'll just say one word. This picture is really a picture from the Mobile World Congress demo that we did back in 2012. And this kind of really made it clear why interoperability is so important. Even in this little demo, there are multiple partners involved, Harmonic, Akamai, Qualcomm in this case, and even the BBC. And there was a lot of sort of ad hoc interoperability testing that had to be done to make this whole thing work. And so we really got the point from this, that really interoperability is key here. And with that, I'll pass it on to Will.
Great. Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to just briefly say a few words about Akamai, how we do video, and why we're putting our weight and our influence and actually putting our money on the line when it comes to Dash-264. We think it's the right way to be doing Dash, and we're very active in helping define what Dash-264 means. So you probably know Akamai is a very large CDN. We deliver a lot of content. Part of what we deliver is media. We deliver about 600 gigabytes of video data every second. And right now we're pushing about 2.2 million streams. That's live and VOD streams. So we're very large, and it's important to us what format these streams go out. This rather busy slide I don't have animation, unfortunately, otherwise it'll make a little bit more sense. But we have a cloud-based solution, and I know cloud is a trendy, buzzy term at the moment, but it's what we built 10 years ago, and it's been evolving ever since then. Our media cloud is called Solar. It's a new brand name. So if you see Solar out there, it's basically, think of it as Akamai's media cloud. Source files come in on the left-hand side. And what's interesting with Akamai is we don't require customers to pre-segment content. So you can push up non-segmented, contiguous MP4 files, one for each bitrate right now, leave them on your origin or push them into our origin, and then in the network and on the fly, we will segment those and package them into the current suite of HTTP segmented formats, which is Apple's HLS, Adobe's HDS. You can also do progressive download and smooth HD out of that. And as you can see from the diagram in the yellow, we're going to be adding on to that mix MPEG-DASH, and we're going to be doing it under the restriction set of DASH-264. And within that cloud, we can add on advertising, and we can add DRM while we're doing it. We'll further optimize this by removing the requirement to have the encoder and have the bit rates, which is the direct line from the source files over to the origin. You'll be able to just give us one high-quality mezzanine file, and we'll take care of making the renditions and packaging it on the fly. So part of the attraction of us for DASH-264 is, well, the attraction for Dash is to get rid of all the noise on the right-hand side there, and all the complexity. There's a lot we have to deal with when it comes to different manifest formats, and it sure would be nice to be able to focus down. We're not in any way going to drop our existing customers off formats. We're committed to HDS and HLS, and we're going to add Dash into that mix. We're going to add DASH-264 because it's a common sense set of requirements, and it's actually taking features that we're already doing, we're already enabling on our network. If you look at the segmentation, it's very similar to what Smooth HD is using. It's ISO-based media file format. That is also the intermediate format that we're using within our network, so there's a very natural match for us there. The common encryption is highly attractive. It stops duplication of content. It makes our caches more efficient because we're not storing separately protected content in different silos. We will be deploying this. Our Dash deployment will be out in Q3 of next year in terms of dynamic instantiation. We will be able to do simple PMD delivery next week if you so wanted. That means it would just come into our network and go out. We won't modify it. But what I'm talking about is a more sophisticated generation of the Dash content within the cloud, and that is slated for Q3.
Right. And then next.
Yeah. CastLabs is a provider of software technology and tools and services aiming to reduce the cost for video delivery services. And in order to do that, we are looking for technologies that are helping to reduce the complexity of such video delivery services. Dash is definitely helpful, but Dash is a very flexible standard. It contains multiple profile, MPEG-4, MPEG-2. It's containing a lot of options. So what the DASH-264 promises is to reduce these options and simplify the deployment for services. So DASH-264 contains a set of constraints. We saw that before. We have SD video, HD video, 3D video later, HEVC encoding. So it's possible to have a modular approach to encode one set of content for multiple devices, include multi-channel audio features, for example, include premium features for premium content, feature-rich subtitles, and we also know that we have a definite set of content metadata available, making it easier for the devices to recognize the content. If you look at, for example, HLS, it's not very constrained. You don't know exactly what metadata you have available in a manifest. So you need to deal with a lot of variability in these manifests. In DASH-264, we try to make it define a set of metadata always available to all clients, making it sure that, Ultraviolet is an example for utilizing Dash to. Could you please wait? Could you follow? Sorry, I
Okay.
need to come back. Sorry.
Okay, you're done. Okay, here by DRM, one of the oldest and leading DRM providers on the market, and one of our whole focus is, of course, to minimize cost for our customers. And we serve the major customers, major brands in the market, and for us it's important to follow where the whole industry goes. And MPEG-DASH gives us and to the market actually a great opportunity to minimize the cost. What we are focusing mostly is on encryption portions. We provide a variety of ways how the content can be encrypted on the fly using our encoding partners. We have our own tools which perform the encryption. We also do focusing on actually playback platforms, where for us interoperability is it's a crucial thing. And I think the way how the MPEG-DASH progressing is very exciting. We already made some good progress in order demonstrating the whole technology. We did some demos with the Olympics, VRT. It was a good success story. And today we're also progressing, especially with multi-channel audio support and 5.1 surround. So we working together with Fraunhofer in order to build this thing, and that's actually, it's already done. We do have a proof of concept. It's working today. And I think the whole story behind the MPEG-DASH, I mean, yes, you guys said, there is lots of different profiles. There may be some complexity, but in general, as I can see it, like, for example, industry already has adaptive bitrate streaming. They know already how to do that, how to work with that, and I think for the whole industry, it will be easier to switch to the MPEG-DASH and start supporting it on the broad and wide platforms. So.
And Jan, I'll put your slide up.
All right. All right. So just briefly, Fraunhofer is a Germany-based R&D organization that has many activities in the scientific area. One of them is audio coding. So we are usually known as the inventors of MP3 and co-developers of the AAC audio format. And so we are traditionally an organization that is very active in MPEG and other standardization bodies. And so we've been involved in the MPEG-DASH standard development and are now also actively involved in promoting the adoption of the standard as part of the DASH Industry Forum. And since we are an audio company, I'm going to focus on what's being defined in DASH-264 currently for audio and what we are working on. As Mike has on his initial slide, we have a base set of features that is part of our interoperability document that defines 264 video and HEAC v2 for stereo audio. And the important part here is for many device makers that in order to support the DASH-based profile, you can, in most cases, reuse existing decode implementations, both for video as well as for audio. We have adaptive bitrate support, of course, for video, but also for audio in the profile. And as mentioned before, there are various test vectors that are available to DASH-IF members to conduct interoperability tests. Mike also mentioned a few of the extensions that we are working on right now for video as well as for audio. And I'd like to just briefly talk a little bit about the work we are doing for the multi-channel audio extension. So as you can see on the slide, we have formed a task force with current members Dolby, DTS, Fraunhofer, Sony, and ByDRM that is working on that multi-channel extension. The scope here is basically to enhance the audio support beyond the base profile. So add multi-channel audio to deliver premium services. And we defined a couple of requirements that are compatible client should support at least one of those, ideally all of them or more of them. So obviously, if you want to play multi-channel audio on a device, you should be able to decode it. And one scenario is you have the phone like this one connected over HDMI to a home theater system. And so you should be able to play the multi-channel audio on your home theater system. You can do that by decoding on the device, or you can do that by passing through the bit stream to an external AV receiver. There's also always the option on a mobile device to downmix multi-channel to stereo. So for instance, for headphone output. There are further requirements that we are currently discussing. So I'm inviting everybody to join the discussion. We are also defining test cases. Just like we've done for the base profile, we will have test cases and test vectors that will be available for interoperability tests. And I think all the parties involved committed to have the initial test vectors available by the beginning of December, when we have our next DASH-IF face-to-face meeting in San Francisco. Obviously, as you can see from the member companies in the group, there are various codecs being proposed and will be tested. The Dolby family of codecs, DD+, and True HD, the DTS HD family, and the Legacy DTS, as well as the AC multi-channel family, which includes HE, AC multi-channel, and MPEG surround. So that's, as I said, ongoing work, and picking up many features that we've seen in being used in broadcast already. So that's another attempt to enable Dash functionality on those devices without, for instance, adding IP costs to hybrid clients, for instance.
Great, thank you. So for the next part, I'm going to leave it pretty open-ended. I have one question of my own, and I'd like you to be thinking of your own questions to ask the panelists. But let me put the one question I have, which I think is a relatively hard question, interesting question for us. And I'll tell you what the motivation is. At Qualcomm, we are building the Dash client into our product, as we've announced a long time ago. And we do have customers coming to us at this point asking for deployment of Dash. One of the interesting things is that they're not necessarily members of the Dash industry forum. So when they come to us, they're not necessarily asking for exactly what's in DASH-264. And that is somewhat of an issue. So we kind of like to solve that problem. I'll put the question to the panelists, or in general, how can we improve the likelihood that customers demand and deploy DASH-264? Anybody want to take that on?
Sure, maybe I can start. Well, I think one of the major concerns from the people who is not really involved in developing this and not really involved in the DASH-264 group is, well, they should know how this works. So I think from our standpoint, it's crucial to bring live examples and use cases, and in a very simplistic way, with the demos, with the available content, so that these people can actually see not the standards and not these big documents with the different millions, tons of variables and read it, but they just need to look at and see how it's worked. That's one of my vision. Okay, for example.
And just to add to that, I mean, obviously, I fully agree with Andrew here. It's one thing to have an MPEG standard. It's another step closer to reality to have an interoperability to document like DASH-264. But in order to add credibility, you have to have an interoperability testing program like the one we are launching now, which is available to DASH-IF members. But also, as Andrew pointed out, showing real-world use of Dash is very important. We started that with the Olympic trials earlier this year, where you could actually see this working in a broadcast environment. As Andrew mentioned, we have just, it's not a commercial, but just to show you, like, if members of the Dash Industry Forum can collaborate inside the organization, or in parallel to that, we can actually have real-world Dash implementations. Like on this Google phone, we have the by DRM Dash client that's also used the basis for the HBO Go app. And here we're making native use of the codecs that are built into Android. In this case, H.264 and also now AAC multi-channel. And we can have a real-world Dash-compliant product using existing hardware and adding the Dash functionality to the clients being deployed on those devices. And if I plug this into my TV and the home theater system, we don't have speakers here, but I would now be able to watch a premium HBO Go service in excellent video quality with adaptive bitrate switching and multi-channel AAC audio, and all compliant to the Dash-264 specification. So I think that's that's part of the message that we need to bring across. This is real. This helps deployment of Dash-based services.
I think one interesting point is that it helps to reduce fragmentation. So Dash-264 can actually deliver on the promise that you encode once and deliver the same content. You need to do it once properly. So I lost track before on that. You need to encode it once properly in preparing for multiple devices, multiple frame rates, multiple bit rates, multiple resolutions up to 3D. Put all the features you might want to use in one content set, and be assured that every device that is interoperability tested within Dash-264 will play that back. At least the base profile, but probably the additional features on top of that. And you don't need to have, with each new device generation, a new encoding on the server. You need to add every couple of months new content on the server. Encode it once properly and rely on the infrastructure of Dash-264, the test vectors and the drive of the group to make sure that the devices will play that back, and you don't need to worry anymore. New devices, new DRMs, one format, multiple DRMs, multiple devices.
I should say so.
You don't have to.
I have lots to say. We can increase the likelihood in a number of ways. The one positive to driving to people towards a convergent solution is it's genuinely mutually beneficial. It reduces the friction in your ecosystem when you're using something that is interoperable with other people in the delivery chain. So there's a natural incentive for people. It's the easier way to deploy Dash is to deploy something that a lot of other people are deploying. And Dash-264 is a vehicle for doing that. So I think you're going to see a lot of companies, if they try to go out with their own version, there's not really an economic incentive in the long term, certainly, to try to do that. There's a strong incentive for people to coalesce around a format. I think it's the Dash-IF's job to evangelize that format, provide working examples, provide the test vectors, and certainly all three of those are being worked on currently. You also increase the likelihood by getting more content owners to work on Dash-264. Dash-264 is open. Anyone in this room can join Dash-IF and start working on it. If it's important to your business, you should think about doing that. There's a lot of people who are vendors of solutions right now defining the requirements. We do need more people who are consumers, people who pay the bills. So if you work for a studio, you work for a delivery agency, you work for Viacom or CBS or ESPN or NBC Sports, you should think about making sure your requirements are well represented in Dash-264 so that it's things that you want to buy and not necessarily things that we all want to sell to you.
I like that answer. So I want to reiterate what Will just said. I think that's one of the issues is that I think some of the consumers, so to speak, are the people who actually have the content and who will be paying the bill, so to speak. For whatever reason, there are some in the Dash-IF at this point, but not enough. And I don't know exactly why that is, but it may be because they think it's a very technically oriented group, which it is. But on the other hand, I think what we need from those people is not the technical work, but the requirements and the user stories and things like that, to bring those into the Dash-IF so we can all say, okay, that's what we should be developing exactly like this. So I think that's one part of it, and I think the other part is educational. I don't think we've done a great job of, we talk about Dash-264, if though there's something out there that's published, then everybody knows what it is, but that's not really the case at this point. We have obviously a very good internal version of the DASH-IF document, but we haven't actually published that out to the world.
When is it going to be published?
Well, that's a good question, and we say here we're going to, here I'll put that up. We're going to publish it on December 15th, but that's subject to approval within the DASH-IF. But I think that should be a good target that we should try to do too. This slide here also gives the website, the dashif.org is a good place to go find information. The organization is new, so it's not the best website in the world, but it'll get better over time. Will ask because he's actually one of the main people organizing that.
I am the webmaster. So
Yeah. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions for the panelists, if anybody has. Yes?
My question is about the file format you chose.
Yes.
You chose MP4 as a file format, that's correct?
Yes, the ISO-based media file format. Yeah.
Can you comment on why you chose MP4 and not, for example, transport streams? And also, you mentioned ultraviolet. I'm not really familiar with that. So how does that come into play?
So who wants to go ahead? Feel free. Andrew, you will.
Sure. Well, we basically, the MPEG-DASH supports MPEG-4 as also MPEG-2S transport stream. So you can have both.
Yeah, but not inside DASH-264.
Not in
But not inside, yeah.
Yeah. So you want to talk
Okay,
about?
so yeah, there are a number of perspectives on this answer. One of the main ones is there are a number of features inside ISO-based media file format that we find attractive. The largest one being common encryption. So if you're in the DRM space, that we feel, especially from the Akamai perspective and the CDN perspective, and I mentioned it also matches the format we've chosen to be our intermediate format in our network. Now that's a selfish reason. I'm not saying that's good for you, but that's certainly good for us. It's also good for a lot of other vendors. A lot of people see TS as a solution that's now 20 years old, or David probably knows the exact date when it was published, designed to solve probably a different problem than we're trying to solve here. And they see ISO-based media file format as a newer vehicle that is more flexible and more adaptive going forward. It does raise the big question, and it's probably running through your head, of a schism. DASH-264 is not compliant with HLS. Now DASH has a profile specifically built by Apple to match HLS, and that's good. That's why DASH is a broad standard. This refinement of DASH and this subset and restriction is not compliant, as you pointed out, with HLS and TS segments. But you'll see a large movement in the industry. Outside of Apple, most people prefer to deliver segmented format via MP4. It's what Microsoft have chosen. It's what Adobe has chosen for HDS. And it's what DASH-264 is choosing.
And you had another part to your question about. Okay.
There are a couple of things you can only do with ISO-based media formats. One is definitely common encryption, so encrypt once and add DRMs whenever you need. Another one is you can embed metadata in there. So example use case is the same content, repurpose the same content for downloads you use for DASH-based streaming. So you can have an MPEG-4 file on the server you use for DASH-based streaming, which is containing in itself the metadata instructing the client how to use the file. And you can let the same file download to the client for an offline use case. MPEG-4 is the more recent format, it's the more compelling format, it has more features. So I think it's the better choice.
So there was another question you had about, I think, about ultraviolet. Anybody want to say what that is? Yeah, I think you asked about that, right?
So what ultraviolet is?
You mentioned ultraviolet as a file format. I'm not really familiar with that. So how does that come into play? Is that what you are using it for, as opposed to MP4 that you mentioned?
Okay, so ultraviolet is a system established by the major studios to provide a file-based, internet-based download service for home videos. It's supposed to be the successor of Blu-ray. So when you're not going anymore to the store to buy a Blu-ray disc, when you want to buy that online, then the solution, hopefully the solution to that will be ultraviolet. And ultraviolet is using the same file format. It's fragmented MPEG-4. What ultraviolet calls the common file format, so it adds a defined set of metadata, ultraviolet metadata. But at the end of the day, it's ISO-based media file format, fragmented, with common encryption. And within ultraviolet, there's a specification growing, which is the common streaming format, which is based on DASH as well. And it's compatible to DASH-264. So what you can actually do with DASH-264 is you can get ultraviolet content, and that content is produced by the studio, so it's not anymore the service provider who is encoding it. It's the studio who is providing the ready-to-use MPEG-4. So you can take that, put it on a server, and basically directly stream it with Dash.
Yeah.
And CSF is a very strict subset of restrictions, stricter than DASH-264, designed to suit the studio's requirements for content distribution. So we're working hard to make it so that a CSF file will be playable in a DASH-264 player, but not all DASH-264 content will be playable in CSF players because they're a tighter subset.
But ultraviolet is one example also for an industry standards body that is also looking at what the Dash industry forum is doing and defining for DASH-264. It's an example for the fact that Dash-IF is we are not living on an island and we don't care about what the rest of the world is doing. So we have tight collaborations with other industry bodies that are looking in deploying the Dash standard. So for instance, the EBU is working on proposing how to implement Dash to their broadcast members. There's discussions in the US for the cable industry. The Dash standard is the basis for HBB-TV, hybrid TV in Europe. And so the Dash Industry Forum is collaborating with those organizations to make sure that what we are defining for Dash-264 is at least part of their specifications as well. There might be other restrictions or additions, but the goal is to align those various industry efforts to deploy Dash. And many of the members in Dash-IF are also members in those organizations.
David.
Can you touch on royalties in 1996?
There was a question and an answer there. So I guess MPEG-2TS was 1996? Okay.
So yeah, I can touch it. So a lot of people ask, what is the IP status for Dash in particular, and by reference Dash-264? So it has not been clearly established. A number of companies have made written declarations that it does not contain the IP. Some companies have yet to do so, Ericsson being one of them. And they may never. And people say to me, well, doesn't that scare you? How can you commit to something like Dash when its IP status is unknown? I personally hope that there is a patent pool around it, and I hope it is similar in its fee structure to H.264, because that is flexible enough that it has allowed H.264 to become the dominant standard. Now, there's license fees attached to it, but it's not stopping everybody in this room from using it. And it's clear, nobody gets nervous about using it because they understand how to pay for it and how to license it. So I would like to see similar clarity around Dash. I'm not scared by the concept of a license pool being established. I am scared by it offering unreasonable terms and trying to gouge people. So I think H.264 is a good precedent there. Not the way it started, but the way it is now. Maybe it was driven there by WebM, and maybe Google had a lot to do with driving it down to a point where it's become ubiquitous. But if Dash is as ubiquitous as H.264 is, then we're all better off.
So one comment on that. I don't think anybody said it was IP-free, but I think what they've said is they've made particular IPR declarations that from their perspective they're not going to charge fees, or it's going to fit into their existing licensing model where essentially no one's going to get charged anything more. So no one has explicitly said we're going to go out and demand royalties at this point for Dash that I know of. But on the other hand, not everybody said that we won't either. So
I have the mic over here.
You guys can't see. I have a question about HLS and specifically the HLS new selective scrambling. Do you have any comments or future predictions for HLS?
Actually, I don't even know. What is the selective scrambling? You can teach us something.
Oh, in the latest draft that was published, they changed their scrambling mechanisms.
Okay. Well, I don't know anything about that specifically, but I think Raj made a good point this morning that that HLS is not a standard. It's an IETF individual draft, and probably will remain that way. It's just out there for information, and it's changed something like 10 times at this point, and no one else has made any input to that other than Apple. And so the whole, it's a changing thing all the time, and I'm not sure if this scrambling is backwards compatible with the previous version that they had out there. But that's one of the issues they have sometimes. They put out a new version, and it's not even backward compatible with their previous version. And so that kind of fractures their own market, which is sort of interesting. That's one of the things we're definitely not trying to avoid with DASH-264 in particular, is to kind of get the best features from all the different companies together and agree on something that we're going to deploy and really stay with that and deploy that for the next few years. Also taking into account that there will be extensions, but not every player will play with every extension, for example. Anybody else have any comments about? I'm going to stay away from that one. Huh? Okay.
Yeah, I guess we're the wrong guys to ask about HLS, because we're working on something that...
well, on the other hand, I mean, our company supports HLS, and I'm sure...
Yeah. And we
do.
Quarter of our traffic is HLS.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah.
But there is also like some, for example, when we talk about the live stream, right, there is like 10 seconds segments, which gives you like latency. So it's pretty old.
You can actually, with HLS, vary the segment length.
You can.
Yes.
The trouble is you're always, if you control the client, you can make sure that its retry and its switching logic is compatible with the shorter segment. With Apple, you don't control the client, nor do you have any input into the heuristics they're using to switch.
That's true.
So you need to go with a segment length that works well for them. And that gets awkward at times. And the various drafts of HLS are frustrating for many people. There's no place you can go to get HLS certified if you're making an encoder. It's your best efforts, and if it plays back on an Apple device, which I do own, then it works well. And that's what Apple care about, and that's probably all they should care about. They are not trying to create the convergence standard for the Internet. It happens they've created something that's very popular, works well on their devices. What Dash is trying to do is create a converged standard for media delivery that works on all devices, including Apple's device.
And actually, there was a point made this morning, which I'll say again, that Apple was very involved in the standardization of Dash. In fact, they took care to be very involved, because I think their position is that they're not going to, for business reasons, they're not going to deploy it at this point. But if they ever do decide to deploy a standardized version of adaptive streaming, they want to make sure it's a good one. And therefore, they wanted to make sure they had good input into the Dash standard.
I think HLS has a bunch of limitations when you're looking at premium features. There's no defined way how to do subtitles. There is no defined way how to do things like multi-channel audio. Nor is it clearly defined what the decoder, what the device is able to expect from a manifest. I mean, the minimum set of features in there is really little. So if you're looking at future services that try to improve the user experience, I think you're pretty much going very fast at limits using HLS.
Speaking of limits, we're at the end of our session, so we're kind of limited in that sense. Maybe we can take one more quick question. What's that? What is he saying?
Okay, after
yes.
the question, we need to pimp this evening's networking
Yes, okay,
event,
we'll do
so-
that. Thanks for the reminder. Can't really see that.
I have one more question.
Yes, question.
One of the things that's currently interested in the industry is advertisement, specifically advertisement insertion on the client device. Is any work being done within the Dash standard for the markup of the playlist to actually address this opportunity, like any standard being done regarding advertisement insertion?
Sorry, it was hard for us to understand the question. Is
Ad insertion.
okay, yeah. So Dash. Mike, you guys want to say?
You had something else.
Yeah, I had. So Dash is well suited to the dynamic insertion of advertising into the manifest. It has a concept of periods. So the presentation is the entire thing, the entire show or the stream, and it's made up of a sequence, a single linear sequence of periods. These periods can hold dissimilar content, and in fact, it's designed to carry ads that are then linear ads inserted inside your stream. So the players know that when they encounter this, it may be different bit rates, different representations, different sizes. That's okay. Players can handle it. You're not forced to try to mold your ad to be exactly the same and to fit into your primary carrying stream. So Dash has the notion of periods. With Qualcomm, we demoed dynamic ad insertion at Mobile World Congress back in January. So it certainly works. We're looking for the ad insertion companies to be bringing it out. You'll see Akamai doing something along those lines next year. So Dash is a great vehicle for server-side ad insertion.
And it's a little harder to describe, but it can even handle the case where you don't know what time the ad is going to play, like you're watching a sports game and there's some injury on the field and suddenly you have to insert an ad. So it can definitely handle that case as well. Anybody else want to say anything about this before we... Okay.